All right. Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a short video on how to research, which I know seems like a simple topic and maybe something you already know how to do, but it is the research track. So we're going to look at different ways that we research, how we employ this on a daily basis, and so on. So first things first, we'll think about where we find information, right? So in other words, if you need information, where do you look? Granted, to some extent, it does depend on the context, whether or not you're looking for a recipe or looking for what class to take or something more sophisticated, depends on where you go for research. And one of the analogies that I like to use is grocery shopping, right? So if you are looking for ingredients to make a recipe, you might go to one store. Depending on the complexity of that recipe, you may have to go to a specialty store or multiple stores to find those ingredients. So where we look for information depends on, to some extent, what we're looking for. And we do research all the time. Most of us are consuming news, general information from social media on a regular basis. In fact, Gen Z is topping the charts, as you can see here, with how much they use social media to gain information and news. And some of these things are shifting slightly. We see students, young people using uh, social media and also AI to find information or understand topics. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Whether it's good or bad is a slightly different conversation. But one of the things that I want to point out here is that there is a potential illusion of doing research, that we are going and finding something and we're getting a quick answer and maybe not doing a whole lot with that information, which is what academic research is not just finding the information, reporting in detail, but doing something with it. Again, to go back to the analogy of cooking, once I have those ingredients, I have to combine them to make something. And that's what we'll be doing, at least over the course of this first quarter as we work on the literature review. So if we look at the most likely place you're going to find information these days or go to find information, we're looking at Google, right? Most people will go to Google, especially for an academic class, to find information, maybe some outliers, and maybe you would go to Google Scholar or Academic Search Complete, and that is great. And we'll talk about those a little bit more in this video as well. So this infographic just helps us provide a little bit of context, right? And when we look at 83.8 billion visits to Google in 2024, right? That's a lot of searches. We are searching a lot, and those searches are all over the place, right? Lots of different things that people are looking for. The average user spends about 10 minutes on Google. There are 43 billion websites on Google, probably a little bit more, which tells us there's a lot of information out there. And part of research isn't just finding an answer, but knowing which answers to trust, right? Again, probably not a surprise that there's a lot of stuff on the internet that is not necessarily reliable or trustworthy. So the other one last thing I want to point out, which I think might be on my next slide, so I'm going to go ahead and jump forward, yes, is the way that people use Google. And I don't know if it's a factor of convenience or attention span or something else, but most people, and again, acknowledging that it depends on what we're looking for and what the context is for the research, most people will click on the first results, like 40% of the time. That's a good amount of the time that people are clicking on the first result, which is why some results are sponsored, right? They want those sponsored content, knows that you're going to click on that first, or that most people will click on it. So they want to bump that up to the top. The average time for a first click is about 15 seconds, which means people are doing a search, quickly skimming and clicking on a result. That's not really a whole lot of time to think critically about what a source is. I think a part of that is because we know that we can come back. So if we click on a source, look at it, read it, it's not what we want, we can go back one page, right? So again, just to contextualize this, that we are doing a lot of searches. We do it all the time, finding information, quick answers, whether we're having an argument with somebody or a discussion. So research is finding information. Like that's the first step, or one of the first steps of research, right? Is finding information. It really begins with a question, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But when we are doing research, we're trying to find information, and we have to think about where we look. Hopefully, when you think about the question, where do you look for information, you're thinking Google, books, academic search complete, the college library, something like that. And these tools are going to be incredibly useful this year as you expand your research. And that it's important to remember that there's no way we can possibly read all of the information on a topic. So we have to think about weeding through that information, being very selective, and working efficiently as we're doing research, because you're also taking other classes, you're working, you have internships, you have friends and family and partners and other things that are drawing your attention. And even if you cut everything else out, you still would not have enough time to do all of the research and read all of the things, right? So back in the day, we would go to a library, right? So I'm not nearly old enough for this to have been standard. My elementary school did have a card catalog, which is that picture on the left. And I bring this up for a specific reason, not just like, history, but I want to explain a little bit about how card catalog works if you're unfamiliar, which most of you probably are not. So what you see in these little drawers here, right? So each of those little squares is a drawer that might have been, 12 to 18 inches long, and been stacked with just note cards. And on each note card was a book. So you can imagine how many note cards, right? This is like 6 note cards, 7 note cards, would fit in that much space. When you wanted to look for a book, you would find the correct drawer that corresponded with, fiction, nonfiction, and it was alphabetized. You would find the card for the book. That card would have the location of the book, and you would go to the shelf in the library where that book lived, take that book off the shelf, and then begin perusing that, looking in the glossary or the table of contents to see if it had the information you wanted. What this did was slow down the research process. So if we look at the difference between Google and the card catalog, Google's definitely faster. But because it's faster, and because we have that ability to go back if there's something that wasn't super helpful with that source, we're not as selective at the outset. And there are pros and cons to that. But as we go through this year, what I'm going to encourage you to do is actually try and slow down and adopt a little bit more of that card catalog mentality, which is, what am I really looking for? What are some keywords? How will I know when I find what I need, right? So just food for thought, slowing down is helpful. Now, not a whole lot of card catalogs around. I would still encourage you to go to a library, but a lot of libraries are moving collections online these days. And one way to begin looking for articles, especially peer-reviewed articles, is using Google Scholar. And I used to not be a fan of Google Scholar. I'm changing my ways. The needle's shifting a little bit. But if we think of the difference between Google and Google Scholar, it's really a question of how much information and what information Google is searching from. So Google in general is going to look for anything that's on the internet. Google Scholar is looking for a smaller set, so things that are really more in the peer-reviewed academic realm. So when you're Googling something in general, not Google Scholar, but regular Google, it doesn't care whether the article was written by my crazy uncle or by a professor at Stanford, right? It's just going to look for everything. So we have to be a little bit more careful. Google Scholar, if you are going to use it, and I would suggest, trying it out at least, you're going to want to connect Google Scholar to the Shoreline database. And I'll leave directions for that separate. But if we are using Google Scholar, we're able to find peer-reviewed articles. If it's not connected to the Shoreline database, you will get a lot of results that you won't have access to, and you will hit a paywall, which means it will ask you to pay a lot of money just to access an article. And please do not do that. If you connect Google Scholar to Shoreline, if we have access to it, you will be able to get to that directly through Google Scholar, which is one of the reasons that I've actually become a sort of late adopter of Google Scholar, through having it connected to Shoreline. It's just a little bit easier to navigate. It's a fewer steps to get to. So just, again, food for thought. Now, if you wanted to use the Ray Howard Library on campus, or remotely rather, you can go to the homepage. You can use OneSearch, which is kind of the right on the top search bar, but I would actually encourage you to go to Academic Search Complete. And I'll do a separate sort of video tutorial on this. But if you click on databases and you scroll down, you'll find Academic Search Complete, which is still kind of my favorite because of the ability to search 3 fields, to use Boolean operators, to get citations. There's just a little bit more here. And I would say that if I'm going to be doing a period of research, like I'm going to be sitting down doing research for a while, I'll go ahead and go to Academic Search Complete. If I just really quickly want to find a peer-reviewed article, I would probably go to Google Scholar, just personal preference, okay? So, wrong screen. So one thing that I would recommend is trying your search on multiple search engines. Google Scholar, Academic Search Complete, OneSearch, whatever it is. Once you have your search terms, really consider trying that search on multiple platforms, because the different platforms might find different information. It's the same as kind of reconfiguring or reorganizing your search terms, right? Okay, so come on. There we go. So what if you can't find anything, right? There are times when I've been working with students where finding sources can be a challenge. And it might be a legitimate research gap, which means the information really doesn't exist that you're looking for. Nobody's researched it in depth. Maybe it's a new topic. Maybe it's too niche. I'd say that's a little bit more rare than just not being able to figure out where that information is, right? It's like you don't know what store to go to or what aisle, right? Think of like going to a grocery store you've never been to before and trying to look for one really specific ingredient, like a spice or something like that. You may not know what aisle to go to. You may not know what shelf, but if it's somewhere that you're familiar with, you're going to be able to find that spice, more easily. So a lot of this goes back to research questions, which is, why we spend a lot of time on research questions and keywords. So one of the things is, if you can't find anything and you've used different search platforms and you've used different search terms, you might want to shift from Google Scholar, Academic Search Complete to maybe a couple other strategies that will help you. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. The first one is source mining. So source mining is where, let's say we've found a good source, something that we like. We're going to look at the sources they used and go to those, right? So it's kind of a following the trail of breadcrumbs back to the source. One way to do this, right, is if you go to Wikipedia and you scroll all the way to the bottom, right? We generally don't want to use Wikipedia for academic research, at least not in terms of quoting it. It's good for passive research and sort of foundations, but we can also source mine, which means we can go to these things that are at the bottom, click those, and see if they're relevant or helpful. Another thing that we can do, and we'll be writing a literature review in the fall quarter, right, is look specifically for a literature review. A literature review is generally kind of an overview of the broader conversation on a topic, looking at what different voices within a field are saying. And in fact, literature reviews are kind of a quintessential part of most PhDs and larger research. And I think of this in terms of, before I go and do some expensive experiment, I want to find out if anybody has done that experiment. and what their results were. So it's kind of going out and looking at what other people have done first before we just, go full bore into something. Okay. Um, so peer-reviewed literature review, good place to start. And then kind of moving further afield, like videos and podcasts can be incredibly helpful. TED Talks, reliable sources on YouTube. I know like Star Talk is an astronomy-based YouTube channel and podcast that I would consider reliable. Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the hosts. And if you're not familiar, he's one of the premier astrophysicists in the world. So like, there are legitimate things there. Whether or not we cite them is a separate, sort of question. But going to those things for our passive research or initial research or starting point to kind of springboard us into finding more sources is a good idea. Okay, TED Talks, things like that, I think are probably where I would start. Amazon is another good one. And Amazon is one that I recommend in kind of a specific use case, which is we're very familiar, most of us, with using Amazon to find things. If you go to Amazon and you search in books or audiobooks or whatnot for your topic, you might find something helpful. Now, you don't necessarily have to buy it from Amazon just because it's there, but once you find that book, maybe that book has a preview or a table of contents and looks helpful, you can go to the library, you can request it, either the campus library or your local library. So another good tool as well. And the nice thing is you can also see what reviews are of those books, which gives you a little bit more of like an idea of whether or not that book is reliable or whether or not there are other suggestions. And then lastly is talking to people. You'd be surprised, and maybe you wouldn't, sometimes people are surprised, that talking to other people can be a great springboard into research. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be an expert. We'll do an interview with an expert assignment where you're going to find somebody who is somewhat of an expert within your field. But even talking to friends, family members, partners about your topic can help. And it helps because it's requiring you to rethink and re-explain what you're trying to find, what you're trying to do, which means that you're going to lead yourself to potential new topics, new keywords, new ideas. And maybe that other person, even if they're not an expert, they might ask a question or they might make a connection to another topic that you hadn't thought about. I know from previous experience that even working with students throughout the research track, right, for 8-9 months, 3/4 worth of work in depth, they're doing all this reading, they're becoming experts. And then they go to the UW symposium or they present their work here on campus and they talk to somebody who asks a question, who makes a statement that is something they just hadn't thought about. And that is just part of this. It's why kind of looking at things from different perspectives is so helpful for research. So, doesn't hurt to just chat with other people, friends, family members, whatnot. Okay, so there you go. If you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.